Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. For the first time in U.S. history, a former president of the United States has been convicted of a felony. A Manhattan jury convicted former President Donald Trump on all 34 counts related to alleged hush money payments. CNN's Lee Waldman reports.
The verdict came just as the judge was about to release the jury for the day. Nearly 12 hours of deliberation spread over 2 days to come to the conclusion of guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records after nearly 6 weeks inside of this New York courthouse. Now Donald Trump is the first former president to be a convicted felon. Silence in the courtroom from former President Donald Trump and his team as each of those 34 counts of guilty were read aloud. Reporters inside the courtroom noting his face was red as he turned to leave. Moments later, Trump addressed the media, repeating his refrain of a rigged trial and a conflicted corrupt judge in Juan Merchan while providing no evidence for his claims.
Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent.
Outside of Trump Tower, the newly convicted Trump waved to a mixed crowd of supporters and opponents. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg praised the jury for their work on this case.
We have the most important voice of all, and that's the voice of the jurors. They have spoken. Donald J. Trump has been convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records. All
of this stemming from Trump's efforts to cover up a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Trump has continually denied the payment and any affair with Daniels. The sentencing date for former President Trump has been set for July 11th at 10 a.m. This is just days before the Republican National Convention. This is now the second in-court loss for the Trump team after he was found liable for civil fraud and fined hundreds of millions of dollars. In Lower Manhattan, I'm Lee Waldman reporting.
And for more on this, let's bring in two members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Tom John and Democrat Kip Tu. Tom, let's begin with you. As we just heard, Trump is currently scheduled to be sentenced on July 11th. That's just before the Republican National Convention. How does the party handle this? Does the conviction and sentencing change anything?
I don't think it does a great deal. I mean, this has been around for a while. Everybody knew this was going on and knew there was a possibility of conviction. And frankly, I mean, you go back to the Access Hollywood, right, where Trump had significant negative information come out about him before the 2016 election, and within 3 weeks was back up and actually had improved his position in the polling. I think the party he's the nominee, and they're going to rally around the nominee, and I think it will be, frankly, a rallying cry. If my text messages are any indication, the Trump campaigns use this as an opportunity to try and raise money and raise awareness with voters.
Kip, at its core, this is essentially a campaign finance issue. How likely is it that Trump actually faces prison time? And might the judge agree to delay any prison time until after the election?
The judge might. I think he will. 34 convictions is not insignificant. It's not one. It's 34. So there'll be some pressure for him to put him behind bars. I don't care one way or the other, I guess. I do want to react to what Tom said, and I vehemently disagree. Most polls show that the undecided voters aren't paying any attention, and this is something that could break through to undecided voters, that he's been convicted of 34 charges. The idea that it was around is true, but the idea that he was convicted only happened yesterday. And by the way, that was a jury of 12 people, 2 of whom got their news from Truth Social and Fox News. So even folks that only listen to conservative media, when they're presented with the facts, found him guilty.
Now, this won't be the first time a presidential candidate was convicted of a felony. Terre Haute native Eugene Debs got nearly 1 million votes during the 1920 election while in federal prison. Now, I should point out that was a third-party campaign. Kip, can history provide any guidance as to how this might go?
No, I don't think the Eugene Debs situation is relevant at all. He's a major party candidate for president. It's incredibly disappointing how Republican politicians around the country have rallied around him after a 34-count conviction. I give praise to Todd Young for not doing it, but just about everybody else. It's almost as if Donald Trump decided to run naked on Fifth Avenue. All of a sudden, the Republican Party in the United States would all become nudists.
Tom, I'll let you go ahead and respond to that, but also, does this make the question of Trump's vice presidential pick more urgent?
I really don't think it does. I mean, as a practical matter, this is going to play out. There's going to be an appeal. There's going to be a bond. He's not going to jail before the election. And the only real impact of this is, does it impact the election? And I think the reality of this is, Kip and I are going to disagree. I think a lot of this is priced in. I think there is some small group of people this is going to change their vote, and there is a somewhat larger group of people it's going to change their willingness to disclose their vote. But in a race so close, that could impact the outcome of the election, but I don't actually think it's going to be a huge impact either way. It's one of those nominal things and could honestly be offset by President Biden having a bad fall or another misspeak in his comments somewhere.
Kip, I'll give you about 30 seconds on that question as well, whether or not you think this will tip any voters.
There's most people have already made up their mind. Most polls show that. The people who aren't paying attention, it'll have some effect. And if they're undecided at this point, having one of the nominees with 34 convictions, I would hope, would have some effect.
All right. Kip and Tom, thanks for your insight on this. Stick around. We'll come back to you later in the show. In the meantime, coming up next, we will hear from a lieutenant governor candidate who is mounting an insurgent campaign, why he says he's taking his campaign to the state Republican convention. Welcome back. A fight over the state's second highest office is brewing at this month's Indiana Republican Party convention. Pastor Micah Beckwith has been campaigning for a year now to line up delegates to support his campaign for lieutenant governor. Mike Braun has instead asked delegates to pair him with Julie McGuire. I sat down with Beckwith to talk about his vision for the role. Let's bring in Micah Beckwith. Micah, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Garrett. Appreciate you having me, and it's good to be with you.
So you've been running for lieutenant governor for about a year now. Were you surprised that Mike Braun endorsed someone else for this job?
No, we had suspected that whoever won the nomination was going to typically go the status quo route. And it's just how we've done it for 30 years, is that the nominee tells the delegates who to vote for. And so we were ready for that battle. But I do think we're forcing the question of, who does this office belong to? Does it belong to the governor, or does it belong to the people? And so it's a good conversation that we're having all around the state now.
Tell me about your efforts to bring delegates on board.
We were very successful in getting new people engaged in the process. We've got quite a few delegates that ran and won to get in there and support us at the convention. And so it's all in all, I've just been really encouraged that the people who are getting involved. I love to see people taking ownership of the process, of this their state, and it's ours. The people. It's the people's republic, and we have to make sure that we steward it well, and that's what a republic is all about. And so I've been really encouraged and excited to see all the different faces and new faces getting into the process. So,
why did you decide to campaign publicly for lieutenant governor rather than governor?
Well, two reasons. One, I believe that we've got to get the lieutenant governor office back into the hands of the people. I think it was a check and balance that we were supposed to have for many years. We gave it over to the governor just to say, hey, it really has become a secretarial kind of role in the executive branch. It's really not that way. It's supposed to be the people's office. It's the second representation that we have in the executive branch. And so I wanted to force that conversation, which we've done. I also believe I'm very well qualified for that job. I'm not just running for for Lieutenant Governor just because, I mean, as the Secretary of Agriculture, I have an agriculture background. As a business owner, I could really help in OCRA, the Office of Community Rural Affairs, to bring economic prosperity to small Indiana towns. I'm very equipped for that role specifically. So I think it's really on all fronts. It's a principle of the matter, but it's also, hey, I could serve very, very well and effectively for the people of Indiana in that role.
When you and I talked about a year ago, you said this was about influencing the process. How would you approach this job overall?
Well, one, to be an influencer. I mean, to influence the process. The Lieutenant Governor has a platform, and I think one of the things God's given me the ability to do is use platforms to influence people to say, hey, this is right, this is wrong. Let's make sure that we're going down the path of what's right. And I have just a good gifting, I would say, to be a solid influencer. I'd want to partner with the governor. So Mike Braun would be the Republican nominee. Hopefully, the governor come November, he'll win. And I look forward to working with him on his agenda, to where if he creates a solid conservative agenda, which I believe he will, then I can go out and champion that to the people, to take that to all around the state, saying here's the conservative values that we uphold as Republicans, and we need to make sure that we sell it to the people, because if the people don't buy into it, then it's not going to go far. And one thing I can do is help be a mouthpiece and a champion of that agenda. So I look forward to doing that.
The Lieutenant Governor chairs the Board of Directors for the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority. Now, that agency's purview includes rental assistance and home ownership programs, among other things. How would you approach that role as it pertains to Indiana's housing crisis? Yeah,
I think the housing crisis right now all around the state it's because we're seeing buyouts by big corporate conglomerates coming in. They're not part of Hoosier communities. They're not part of Hoosier values. It's outside entities buying up all of the homes, and we see the home values are going up. I would say it's an overinflated market right now, where we have prices going through the roof. Property taxes are soaring. One of the things I would work with the legislature to help with just the housing crisis in general is getting property taxes under control. I mean, the fact that we as Republicans have not done anything to take the burden off of Hoosiers when it comes to higher taxes, specifically the older generation, 65 and older, some of them have paid off their homes, but yet they're being threatened with eviction because they can't pay the government taxes to stay on their own property. I mean, that's not right. And as Republicans, we need to work to change that. So being a part of that whole housing board, I would really push for let's make it more feasible and viable for just your everyday Hoosiers to be able to own homes. We're seeing that we're getting pushed out of the market, and we've got to do something to stop that, so that we can. I mean, owning a home is an American dream, and we've got to protect that here in Indiana.
Would you involve yourself in the day-to-day operations of the Senate? Historically, that's been left more to the Senate President Pro Tem.
Yeah, I'm someone who likes to get my hands involved in those things. I really enjoy legislative agendas. The legislative season, I've worked with the Indiana Family Institute for a number of years now, and that's what they do. They advocate for good policy in the legislative season. So I like that. I hope to be somebody who, as Lieutenant Governor, is very active, certainly working with the governor too. I mean, I'm not going to try to overstep or usurp the governor and his legislative agenda, but I will certainly run when I feel like there is a good policy that we're advocating for. I'll be a great champion of that, and so I look forward to doing that.
That leads me to another question. You mentioned earlier in this interview that you view Lieutenant Governor as potentially a check and balance against the governor. Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, so we have two voices of representation in the executive branch. We elect the governor and we elect the lieutenant governor. And I think we've given the lieutenant governor just over to the governor over the last 30 years, and we've said, you know, it becomes a secretary for the governor. And I don't believe that's right. I think when COVID really exposed that to me, where we saw the executive branch do things that it should have never done. We saw, and again, this was under Republican leadership, and I'm an outspoken critic of Republicans when I need to be, not because I'm not a Republican. I love Republican principles, but oftentimes Republican leaders, what I'm seeing around the country, they don't follow Republican principles, and I'll call them on that. And I think, just as Scripture says, iron sharpens iron. When you have that check and balance, you're sharpening each other.
Coming up, we check back in with Indiana's best political team on Beckwith and Indiana's abortion ban back on trial. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we bring back Republican Tom John and Democrat Kip Tu. Let's talk about that interview with Micah Beckwith just now. Tom, how would you assess his chances at the state Republican convention later this month?
Well, I mean, I got to give him and his team credit. They've worked hard. I know they've done a tremendous amount of delegate contact. I've been contacted. My wife, who is running for a delegate, has been contacted, a lot of other people. So they have worked it hard, and he is somebody who's shown to be a really active grassroots campaigner. I mean, that being said, I think the party as a whole, the county chairman, the state committee members, and others are going to be deferential to our gubernatorial nominee. And they're going to look to him and more than likely say, okay, you believe this is the partner you need to move our state forward. We're going to be behind you. And I think at the end of the day, it will be a first ballot and it will not be that close of a race. But that's not for the effort or lack of effort on behalf of Micah Beckwith's team.
Kip, we know Braun's running mate will be either Beckwith or Julie McGuire. How much does the Republican choice of running mate affect Democratic strategies going into the general election?
I don't think it affects it very much. I would say that it might affect it more if the Christian nationalist becomes the lieutenant governor, and then he will be part of a punching bag, I think, to that degree. But usually lieutenant governors don't matter at all unless they hurt you. And then this is a case where I think if they nominate Beckwith, they hurt their nominee. I think it is ridiculous the idea that he needs to be a check on the governor. That's what the legislature is for, not your lieutenant governor. You're just baking in dysfunction. You'll have drama and dysfunction for the entire campaign, and then if they were to win, then you'd have it for 4 years while they were in office. It's a terrible mistake, not only for the internal parts, but because he's a Christian nationalist who doesn't align with Indiana.
Let's turn to the abortion lawsuit currently ongoing in Monroe County. A bench trial just wrapped up over the medical exceptions to Indiana's abortion ban. Kip, based on how things have gone in that trial, how likely is it the judge rules in favor of the plaintiffs and thus rules that the medical exception was too narrow?
I think there's a decent chance that it'll be ruled that way, but of course then it'll go up on appeal. One of the things that I found interesting about this whole thing is I've seen several polls now where most Hoosiers don't even know abortion's illegal in the state. So we got some work to do as a Democratic Party to make sure they understand that. And I think the more voters know the extremism of the Republican Party, the better off we're going to be as a party.
Tom, if the judge rules in favor of the plaintiffs, would this effectively end the ban?
I mean, I think obviously it'll have it go directly up to the Supreme Court again. I mean, potentially the judge would obviously put a stay on it potentially, but I think at the end of the day, it goes up to the Supreme Court and then it'll be decided there. And I think this particular case has a real problem in that they don't have a specific plaintiff, and it is not dissimilar to a facial challenge, and I think it'll probably go the same way as the last lawsuit with regard to it. And until somebody actually has a specific plaintiff, a la Roe v. Wade, you'll likely not see the result that Kip and the Democrats would like to see.
Before we go, I want to talk about a new study by the conservative-leaning Institute for Legislative Analysis. They say they reviewed more than 65,000 congressional votes, found Republican members of Congress voted with the conservative position on cultural and social issues 97% of the time, but they only voted for conservative tax and fiscal policies about half the time. Got about 40 seconds left. Tom, what are your thoughts on that? What's that say about where the party is?
It is a reflection of what's going on and what the changes have been, where the Republican Party has become more populist. And frankly, fiscal austerity is not necessarily a populist viewpoint. And I think it is reflective of that, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to evolve.
Kip, I got about 15 seconds left. Your thoughts?
Republicans have been phony about fiscal conservatism for a very long time. It was a vice president of the Republican Party who said deficits don't matter, Dick Cheney. So if you want fiscal conservatism, vote Democratic.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30, and be sure to tune in at 11 for The Hill Sunday with Chris Starwall. Have a great rest of your weekend.